In this video, I'm going to discuss some of the major definitions out of Chapter 3. These are all calculational definitions. We're not going to calculate anything, but I'm going to just talk about and briefly describe each definition. The first part of Chapter 3 deals with measures of center. And there are three ways to measure center, three major ways: mean, median, and mode. Mean is adding up all the numbers and dividing by your sample size. Mode is the number that occurs most often, and the median is sorting your data and finding that middle number. Never use the term average, because average can mean mean, median, or mode, and you really don't know. So always use the correct term. If it's a median, use the word median. A lot of times, the median will be used for things like average household income. The reason why we use the median versus the mean is that some people make a large amount of money and they can skew the number. So we use the median. By using the median, numbers at the very top of the scale don't affect as much the middle number. So that's why a lot of times on census data and on TV shows, you will see median household income. They may use the word average, but usually they're talking about median household income. So always use the correct terminology. Do not use the word average, because that can get confusing. Next in this chapter, we have variance. And the variance deals with how far apart the data is, the spread of the data. And there's several different ways to measure variation. One way is with the range. And the range is not used much anymore. It's very easy to calculate. It doesn't really do much. The others are standard deviation and the variance. For the standard deviation, there's one for the population and the sample. Most of the time we'll use the sample. Same for the variance. One for the sample, one for the population. Again, most of the time we will be using the sample variation. They are related because if you square the standard deviation, you get the variance. And if you take the square root of the variance, you get the standard deviation. So they're directly related to each other. Standard deviation all by itself really does not do much. It's just a number, and it can be large or small depending upon the data size, but it really gives you no information. In order to accurately understand the standard deviation, we have to calculate what's called the coefficient of variation. The coefficient of variation is usually abbreviated CV, and that is your standard deviation divided by the mean times 100%. And that will tell you as a percentage what the spread of the data is. So you have to use your coefficient of variation to determine what that standard deviation actually means. Because a large standard deviation is not necessarily a bad thing. Neither is a really small standard deviation a good thing, because it depends upon the data size. If you're working in millions, large standard deviation, not a bad thing. If you're working in decimal numbers, small standard deviation may or may not be a good thing. So you really have to look at your coefficient of variation. Another part of this chapter deals with relative standing. And relative standing is the percentiles, which is used a lot of times when you take a standardized test. If you take the ACT or the SAT, they may see you score in the 90th percentile. What are percentiles? Percentiles is where they organize the data. If it was the 90th percentile, you would be in the top 10%, and that is where they organize the data and counted down the top 10%, or bottom 90%. So that is what percentiles are. And there's quartiles, which are also used, which are percentiles. We have three of them. We have a Q1, Q2, and Q3. And they represent 25%, 50% of the data, and 75%. We can also use these to make box plots and other various graphs and charts. Very important, though, when looking at percentiles that you understand the chart on page 131 of your textbook. That's a flow chart, and that will help you find the quartiles or any particular percentile that you need to find. So always look at that flow chart there, and you see that it deals with your number, how many pieces of data that you have, and sometimes you have to maybe divide by 2, add two numbers together, divide by 2. Otherwise, it may just be that number directly. Very important that you look on page 131 at that flow chart for finding percentiles. That concludes most of the definitions for Chapter 3. Again, we're not calculating things. I'm just describing the definitions and discussing how they're used.